Ani Jayek. Welcome back to our Indigenous Author Monday and Braiding Sweetgrass Book Club. Welcome. So as usual, when we get started, I like to smudge, but do whatever works for you. I like to have, today I just have water because I've already had my tea, but have your beverage of choice so that you can stay hydrated. And then we like to stay seated. I like my legs crossed, but some people like their feet flat on the floor, so whatever works for you. And we're just going to take a couple deep breaths to get in the moment so we aren't distracted by anything else that's going on in our mind, because that's what we do. So we're going to take a moment just for some mindfulness, to get in the moment, to stop multitasking, and we're going to take a couple deep breaths in. Perfect. Let's get started. Okay, so this is the last section of the book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And she says, sweetgrass, as the hair of Mother Earth, is traditionally braided to show loving care for her well-being. Braids, plaited of 3 strands, are given away as signs of kindness and gratitude. And I think that goes along with her theme of I can never say that word properly, but I think you know what I mean. So it's just reminding us of that give relationship, that symbiotic relationship that we should have with each other and with the earth and plant life and all that comes along with it. So then we're starting our next chapter in the footsteps of Nanabojo, becoming indigenous to place. And traditionally we don't tell stories of Nanabojo or of spirits who have passed unless it's winter time. So it's not winter anymore, it's officially spring. So I have to be careful about how much I put on social media that can be played anytime. So that's also why it's important for you to have this book so that you can read to yourself and know what we're talking about. So we are, again, she's referencing Sky Woman, who's one of my favorites, and Nanabojo, her son, right? No, not her son. There's so much. So we're talking about Sky Woman, and Nanabojo will come in this as well. But I want to read this paragraph. We are on page 205. I'm new here too, on the shore at the western edge of the continent, new to how land appears and disappears in this place with the tides and with the fog. No one knows my name here, and I don't know theirs. Without this exchange of the barest recognition, I feel like I could disappear in the fog along with everything else. And this just struck me for a few reasons, but I can relate. We moved here from Utah about 7.5 years ago. We don't have family here. We didn't have any ties here, no friends, nothing. And we had to leave for reasons that were pretty traumatic. And then when we arrived here, I had this silly notion that I didn't need any friends. I would stay on our property in our home and just raise our kids, and I wouldn't need to ever leave. I was just going to raise our kids, and that was going to be it. And that was pretty naive and ignorant on my part, because I it took a few years, realized that I needed friendship and kinship, and I needed people to know that I existed. For quite a few years, I scrapped all of my social media. I tried to become as invisible as possible. And then after a few years went by, I was angry because I was invisible. Isn't that silly how that works out? So it's taken me quite a while to have a social media presence again, because I'm very afraid But at the other hand, like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life afraid. And I feel called to spotlight Indigenous authors and food recipes. And so why should I not do that just because of a silly fear from people who aren't here? So anyway, I read that paragraph and just I had a lot of feelings come back up about how much we need that kinship, that friendship, and how much we need a purpose. And I guess some people can be a hermit and it's just fine. But for most people, we aren't built like that. We are social creatures and we need a purpose. Without that purpose, we give up. And that's what I did. I was giving up, and my kids are grown. I have a daughter in college. So not having that purpose was just, my existence was invisible. And so then I realized I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I needed my purpose. And my purpose will probably change in 5 years, just like yours might too. And it's kind of interesting to look back 5 years and be like, wow, I'm so different now. I've learned so many lessons now. And I'm thankful for that. Now, I loved this part. So she referenced Nanabojo, and she says, I can imagine how it might have been for him in the beginning, before anyone knew him and he did not know them. I too was a stranger at first in this dark, dripping forest perched at the edge of the sea, but I sought out an elder, my Sitka spruce grandmother with a lap wide enough for many grandchildren. I introduced myself, told her my name and why I had come. I offered her tobacco from my pouch and asked if I might visit in her community for a time. She asked me to sit down, and there was a place right between her roots. Her canopy towers above the forest, and her swaying foliage is constantly murmuring to her neighbors. I know she'll eventually pass the word and my name on the wind. Wow. That was beautiful. I loved that. How she went out and her grandmother tree. It's not just a tree. She became her grandmother and her comfort, and she knew her name. And Robin knew that she would whisper her name to others. That was incredibly deep and beautiful and true. I loved that. And I hope that you love that too. I'd like to know what you think about that. And if you've ever had an experience like that, that was absolutely beautiful. Nanabojo did not know his parentage or his origins, only that he was set down into a fully peopled world of plants and animals, winds and water. He was an immigrant too. Before he arrived, the world was all here, in balance and harmony, each one fulfilling their purpose in creation. He understood, as some did not, that this was not the new world, but one that was ancient before he came. That is a good reminder to us as well. I know often there's people who don't understand Indigenous people, or take the supremacist road. I don't want to be too controversial, but I think you catch my drift. They like to use that Native people weren't the first ones here either, so they can't claim any land, and they like to use that against us a lot. Or they'll use the Bering Strait theory to prove that we're immigrants too, which is a silly argument, and I don't even get into arguments with people like that because they're not listening. It doesn't matter. And I love how Robin reminds us that we were immigrants here, just as non-Indigenous people to Turtle Island were also immigrants to their land at one point as well. We all came from somewhere, and Sky Woman and Nanabojo and all the peoples were the youngest beings here when they came, no matter where it was. So It doesn't matter what science you use. The indigenous people were here first on Turtle Island, and first, yes, as immigrants, absolutely. Whatever science you want to use or whatever traditional story you want to use, we were immigrants, but we had the balance because we listened to the people who were already here, and those people were the animals and the trees and the plants and the Manitou, the great spirits. So I always, when people try to use that argument that Native Americans don't deserve any rights or recognition because we are immigrants too, I just find the whole argument is silly. So I just don't even engage in that. Okay, and I want to read this next part. It's on page 206 and 207 because I think it's a really good discussion point. The time when the original instructions were given, we might call a long time ago, for in the popular way of thinking, history draws a timeline, as if time marched in lockstep in only one direction. Some people say that time is a river into which we can step but once, as it flows in a straight path to the sea. But Nanabojo's people know time as a circle. Time is not a river running inexorably to the sea, but the sea itself, its tides that appear and disappear, the fog that rises to become rain in a different river, all things that were will come again. In the way of linear time, you might hear Nanabojo's stories as a mythical lore of history, a recounting of the long ago past and how things come to be. But in circular time, these stories are both history and prophecy, stories for a time yet to come. If time is a circle or a turning circle, there is a place where history and prophecy converge. The footprints of first man lie on the path behind us and on the path ahead. With all the power and all the failings of a human being, Nanabojo did his best with the original instructions and tried to become native to his new home. His legacy is that we are still trying, but the instructions have gotten tattered along the way and many have been forgotten. After all these generations since Columbus, some of the wisest of native elders still puzzle over the people who came to our shores. They look at the toll on the land and say, the problem with these new people is they don't have both feet on the shore. One is still on the boat. They don't seem to know whether they're staying or not. The same observation is heard from some contemporary scholars who see in the social pathologies and relentlessly materialistic culture the fruit of homelessness, a rootless past. America has been called the home of second chances. For the sake of the people, the peoples, and the land, the urgent work of the second man may be to set aside the ways of the colonist and become indigenous to place. But can Americans, as a nation of immigrants, learn to live here as if we were staying, with both feet on the shore? What happens when we truly become native to a place, when we finally make a home? Where are the stories that lead the way? If time does in fact eddy back on itself, maybe the journey of the first man will provide footsteps to guide the journey of the second. Now that was very deep and blunt in a lot of different ways. I'd like to know what you think about it though. And maybe it's time, I know because of our history, as indigenous people, I know that because of our history, residential schools, the laws, we weren't even citizens until the 20s or 30s. I remember my grandpa couldn't vote until he was 44, and it was illegal. I was 4 or 5 years old before it was illegal for me to speak our Borewarami language. It was illegal for us to dress in regalia. It was illegal for us to practice our culture. So because of that, we're very, very fearful. I know my mom and my grandparents were very fearful of even talking about it. So Even today, we're very fearful about telling our stories because we're afraid it'll be taken or appropriated, uh, and but maybe it's time we let go a little bit and just see, because I kind of agree that if the immigrants or the people who aren't indigenous here, if they, in order for them to find a symbiotic relationship with the land here, maybe they need to hear the stories of first man too. But are they willing to listen? Are they willing for the lesson? It's all a little bit frightening, but maybe it's necessary. I don't know. I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Okay, now I want to read a little bit that's on page 211. Had the new people learned what original man was taught at a council of animals, never damage creation, and never interfere with the sacred purpose of another being, the eagle would look down on a different world. The salmon would be crowding up the rivers, and passenger pigeons would darken the sky. Wolves, cranes, nehalim, cougars, lenape, old growth forests would still be here, each fulfilling their sacred purpose. I would be speaking in Potawatomi. We would see that Nanabosho saw. It does not bear too much imagining, for in that direction lies heartbreak. Against the backdrop of that history are an invitation to settler society to become indigenous to place feels like a free ticket to a housebreaking party. It could be read as an open invitation to take what little is left, kind of like what we're just talking about. Can settlers be trusted to follow Nanabosho, to walk so that each step is a greeting to Mother Earth? Grief and fear still sit in the shadows behind the glimmer of hope. Together they try to hold my heart closed. But I need to remember that the grief is the settlers as well. They too will never walk in a tall grass prairie where sunflowers dance with goldfinches. Their children have also lost the chance to sing at the maple dance. They can't drink the water either. Okay, so I want to continue on page 213. Even as I sit in her still shadow, she's sitting with the spruce grandmother. My thoughts are all tangled. Like my elders before me, I want to envision a way that an immigrant society could become indigenous to place, but I'm stumbling on the words. Immigrants cannot, by definition, be indigenous. Indigenous is a birthright word. No amount of time or caring changes history or substitutes for soul deep fusion with the land. Following Nanabosho's footsteps doesn't guarantee transformation of second man to first, but if people do not feel indigenous, can they nevertheless enter into the deep reciprocity that renews the world? Is this something that can be learned? Where are the teachers? I'm remembering the words of Elder Henry Lickers. You know, they came here thinking they'd get rich by working on the land, so they dug their mines and cut down the trees. But the land is the one with the power. While they were working on the land was working on them, teaching them. I sit a long time, and eventually the sound of the wind in Grandmother Sitka's branches washes words away, and I lose myself in just listening to the crisp voice of laurels, the chatter of alders, the whispers of lichens. I have to be reminded, just like Nanabosho, that the plants are our oldest teachers. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit more on 214 and 215, and then that will finish up this chapter. Maybe the task assigned to second man is to unlearn the model of Kudzu and follow the teachings of white man's footstep. In white man's footsteps, she's referring to the plantain that is an immigrant plant, basically. To strive to become naturalized to a place, to throw off the mindset of the immigrant. Being naturalized to a place means to live as if this is the land that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink, that build your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in the ground. Here you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. To become naturalized is to live as if your children's future matters. To take care of the land as if our lives and the lives of all our relatives depend on it, because they do. As time circles around on itself again, maybe white man's footstep is following in Nanabojo's. Perhaps plantain will line the homeward path. We could follow. White man's footstep, generous and healing, grows with its leaves so close to the ground that each step is a greeting to Mother Earth. Okay, now we're moving on to the sound of silver bells on page 216. And I find it very interesting. I didn't know that Robin had lived in the South for a while. And the South, if you are a transplant, that's what they call us, and I am a transplant. It's a bit, I still have some culture shock. I grew up in Utah with a predominant LDS religion, and as an indigenous person, that was hard enough because I think they're trying to get out of this teaching, but when in the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, their racism towards brown and black people were apparent. And I was a cursed Lamanite, no matter that my dad was white, it didn't matter. I was a cursed Lamanite, and black people were cursed Canaanites. Yeah, so I grew up in Utah with that, but I wasn't LDS, so I didn't have that belief on me, and so I was able to almost walk that tightrope between I was Methodist, but also indigenous at heart, and I was lucky with the Methodist church we were in, their reconciling ministry, and they were very welcoming to us and our beliefs as indigenous people. But in the South, it is the Bible Belt. And my son has been bullied. My daughter was bullied when she was here for being Native and not being Baptist Christian. And so it's been a hard road. And so in this chapter, Robin starts talking about her experience of going from the East Coast professor, being a professor in the South, and how everything is around God and his master plan, and it's hard. It's just hard. And then when you're trying to teach science and a lot of your students' answers are all about God, it's just really hard. So I identified a lot with what she was talking about in this book. So she says, this was a dance I was trying to get used to, teaching in the Bible Belt. I stumbled over 2 very left feet. Have you ever wondered how the world got to be put together so beautifully, why certain plants grow here and not there? This is something she asked to her students. Judging by their polite blankness, this was not a burning question for them. Their total disinterest in ecology pained me. To me, ecological insight was the music of the spheres. But to them, it was just one more requirement in their pre-med education. A biological story that wasn't about humans was of little interest. I didn't understand how one could be a biologist without being able to see the land. To know natural history and the elegant flow of natural forces. The earth is so richly endowed that the least we can do in return is to pay attention. And so, with a little evangelical fervor of my own, I set my sights on the conversion of their scientific souls. I love that paragraph so much. I did. I would love to know what you think about that in the comments. Now on page 218, I just want to read this paragraph because it explains the landscape, especially if you're towards the Appalachian side of Tennessee or the South. And she says, the range spread out above us in our valley campsite. The Smokies in early spring are a patchwork of diffuse colors, like a map with an individual nation's colored. Pale green for the newly leafed poplars, gray blocks of the still dormant oaks, and dusty rose for the maples breaking bud. Here and there, hot pink tracts of redbud and swaths of white reveal where the dogwoods bloom, and lines of dark green hemlock trace the watercourses like a cartographer's pen. Back in the classroom, hands white with chalk dust, I had diagrammed the radiance of temperature, soils, and the growing season. Before us, the mountainside spread the pastel map of our field trip, the abstract translated into flowers. I just felt that was incredibly beautiful to read. So in this chapter, Robin talks about taking her pre-med students on like a field trip through the Smoky Mountains, trying to get them to see the importance of wildlife, of nature, of the trees and the plants, and she's really trying hard and she's struggling. And at the end, they're walking back to the vans, and she really thinks she's failed. Like one of the students even like looked at her once and said, "Is this like your religion or something?" And I can totally picture that. So she's feeling so frustrated and like she failed. She didn't get anything through to these students. And we're gonna finish up this chapter. It was fairly short, but it's a good one, so I hope you read it. So they're walking back, and the students start singing Amazing Grace. One by one, they joined in, singing in the long shadows and a drift of white petals settling on our shoulders, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was humbled. Their singing said everything that my well-intentioned lectures did not. On and on they went, adding harmonies as they walked. They understood harmony in a way that I did not. I heard in their raised voices the same outpouring of love and gratitude for the creation that Sky Woman first sang on the back of Turtle Island. In their caress of that old hymn, I came to know that it wasn't naming the source of wonder that mattered. It was wonder itself. Despite my manic efforts and my checklist of scientific names, I knew now that they hadn't missed it at all. Was blind, but now I see. And they did, and so did I. If I forget every genus and species I ever knew, I'll never forget that moment. The worst teacher in the world or the best teacher in the world, neither can be heard over the voices of silver bells and hermit thrushes. The rush of waterfalls and the silence of mosses have the last word. An enthusiastic young PhD colonized by the arrogance of science. I had been fooling myself that I was the only teacher. The land is the real teacher. All we need as students is mindfulness. Paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world. Receiving the gifts with open eyes and open heart. My job was just to lead them into the presence and ready them to hear. On that smoky afternoon, the mountains taught the students and the students taught the teacher. As I drove home that night, the students slept or studied by dimming flashlight. That Sunday afternoon changed forever my way of teaching. A teacher comes, they say, when you are ready, and if you ignore its presence, it will speak to you more loudly, but you have to be quiet to hear. That was beautiful, and a good lesson to all of us that it's good to be mindful and quiet sometimes and to just listen. I need that reminder often. So let me know what you think about these two chapters, and let's discuss in the comments. And I'll see you next week for our next Braiding Sweetgrass book club group. I really appreciate you all, and thank you for being my teachers as well. Take care, protect your joy. Mama P. For every Indigenous Author Monday video that I put out, I am dedicating it to the One Shelf Project put on by Gadakana. Gadakana is an Indigenous organization, a 501c3 nonprofit, tax-deductible organization that provides books in their local libraries that are actually accurate, historically accurate, and by Indigenous authors, both fiction and nonfiction. And their goal is to at least have a shelf dedicated to Indigenous accurate information in their local libraries. They can only do this with help through donors, and they need your help. I will put the link down here, so please check them out. The One Shelf Project, another organization near and dear to my heart. Gadakana.